Welcome to Self-Made Verse. March 18, 2026, something unprecedented happened in the Lok Sabha. For the third time, Parliament extended the deadline for a committee examining one nation, one election. What looked administratively simple is proving constitutionally explosive. India is almost perpetually in election mode, but is synchronized voting the solution or a democratic time bomb? Alright, before we get into the details, let me quickly walk you through what this video covers. First, we'll examine the historical precedent. India actually held simultaneous elections from 1951 to 1967, so this isn't entirely new territory. Then we'll dive into the governance paralysis argument, how perpetual elections are crippling administrative efficiency across states. We'll analyze the constitutional fault lines, particularly the federalism challenge, and the basic structure doctrine concerns that have legal experts divided. Next, we'll look at the political arithmetic. The BJP lacks the numbers for constitutional amendments without opposition support. We'll examine what actually needs to change. 18 constitutional amendments spanning multiple articles. And finally, the most surprising reality, former Chief Justice Gavai says ONOE doesn't violate the Constitution's basic structure, contradicting widespread opposition claims. Now let's understand each of these properly. One nation, one election isn't actually new. From 1951 to 1967, India held simultaneous elections for the Lok Sabha and state assemblies across 4 general elections. It was the natural way democracy worked in our early decades. The disruption came in 1968 and 69, when several state assemblies were prematurely dissolved. Political instability at the state level broke the synchronized cycle that had worked smoothly for 16 years. What today's government proposes is essentially returning to that original architecture, but with far more constitutional scaffolding around it. The intellectual foundation for today's proposal was laid by the Kovind Committee. Former President Ramnath Kovind chaired a high-level committee on simultaneous elections constituted on September 2, 2023. After 191 days of research and extensive stakeholder consultations, they submitted an 18,626-page report in March 2024. But here's where things get complicated. The governance paralysis argument is the most compelling case for ONOE. India is almost perpetually in election mode in any given year. Multiple state elections trigger the Model Code of Conduct. When the MCC is in force, ministers cannot announce new schemes, new appointments stall, and infrastructure projects freeze. A country holding elections quarterly is essentially running a permanent campaign at the cost of actual governance. The financial argument is significant, but often overstated. The Law Commission in 1999 estimated potential savings of 8,500 crore rupees from simultaneous elections. However, the Kovind Committee reports that governments currently spend about 4,500 crore conducting elections, less than 50 rupees per eligible voter. The real electoral expenditure lies elsewhere in campaign spending by political parties. This is estimated at 4 to 7 lakh crore rupees. And that massive spending won't disappear with synchronization. Parties will still need to campaign, still need to reach voters, still need to fund their political machinery. The security argument is more straightforward. India deploys lakhs of central paramilitary forces for every major election. Simultaneous elections would free up this massive deployment for border security and internal security needs that currently get deprioritized during long election seasons. And the public seems to agree. The Kovind Committee received over 21,500 responses from across the country, from Lakshadweep to Andaman and Nicobar, from Nagaland to Dadra and Nagar Haveli. The number supporting ONOE, 80%. But the opposition to ONOE runs deeper than politics. It's rooted in constitutional concerns that any serious UPSC aspirant must understand. The federalism challenge is the most substantive. In SR Bommai versus Union of India in 1994, the Supreme Court declared federalism part of the Constitution's basic structure. States possess independent democratic legitimacy. Under Article 174, the power to dissolve state assembly rests with the governor, who acts on the chief minister's request. ONOE could strip states of this fundamental prerogative, transferring dissolution power effectively to the center. This violates the basic principle of federalism. Samajwadi Party MP Javed Ali captured the regional concern precisely. If simultaneous elections occur, national issues will dominate, sidelining local concerns. Regional parties with limited resources cannot compete with national parties' massive war chests. Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin went further, describing ONOE as an impractical proposition that ignores India's diverse electoral complexities and undermines federalism. This represents the view of most southern and regional parties who see their political space shrinking. The basic structure doctrine adds another layer of complexity. In Kesavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala in 1973, the Supreme Court established that free and fair elections are part of the Constitution's unchangeable core. The argument against ONOE is that it doesn't just change timing. It fundamentally alters electoral accountability itself. Here's the practical nightmare: what happens when a state government collapses mid-term? The Kovind Committee's solution, fresh elections for only the unexpired residual period, creates deeply problematic situations. Imagine a state forced to elect a government for just 1 year because of synchronization requirements. And the numbers confirm the political reality. Even with constitutional theory aside, ONOE faces fundamental parliamentary arithmetic. Constitutional amendments require a 2/3 supermajority in both houses, 362 seats in Lok Sabha, and 167 in Rajya Sabha. The BJP-led NDA won 293 seats in 2024, with BJP reduced to just 240. The India bloc, consisting of parties strongly opposed to simultaneous polls, secured 233 seats. Without significant opposition support, a constitutional amendment is mathematically impossible. Opposition parties have been consistent. Congress, TMC, TMK, Samajwadi Party and AAP have all refused support. Their position isn't just political, it's constitutional. They argue that ONOE centralizes power and weakens regional democracy in ways that cannot be reversed. ONOE isn't a single amendment, it requires comprehensive constitutional restructuring. The Kovind Committee recommended 18 amendments spanning multiple articles. Article 83 concerning Lok Sabha duration, Article 172 covering state assemblies, Article 85 on parliamentary sessions, Article 174 on state legislature sessions. Additional articles requiring amendment include Article 356 on President's rule provisions, Article 324 on Election Commission powers, plus the entire Representation of the People Act 1951. This is constitutional surgery on a massive scale. Implementation timeline is telling. Even if passed today, ONOE would operate only after the first sitting of the Lok Sabha elected in 2029. The assumption is that both the 18th and 19th Lok Sabha complete full 5-year terms. That's a decade-long implementation timeline if everything goes perfectly. So what does all this mean for India's democratic future? Global comparisons offer limited guidance. Sweden holds simultaneous elections, but its population of 10 million barely compares to India's 1.4 billion. So, South Africa synchronizes national and provincial polls, but lacks India's depth of regional party competition. Nepal adopted simultaneous elections after its new 2015 constitution, but Nepal's federal system is barely a decade old and largely untested. India's 75-year federal democracy has deep state-level political ecosystems that evolved over generations. The comparison fails on institutional maturity. The most honest comparison might be Pakistan, which holds simultaneous elections. But Pakistan's recent history demonstrates that electoral simultaneity hasn't produced governance, stability, or democratic accountability there. If anything, it's enabled longer periods of authoritarian drift. For federalism specifically, the implications are stark. Regional parties fear the nationalization of state elections, while local issues get drowned out by national campaigns and national funding. Tamil Nadu's water crisis shouldn't compete for attention with Kashmir's security situation, but ONOE might force exactly that competition. Given this complex reality, what pathways emerge? The Joint Parliamentary Committee extension isn't a stall. It reflects genuine constitutional questions that need resolution. 4 critical issues remain unresolved and demand answers. First, the state ratification question under Article 368. Does ONOE require approval from at least half the states? The Kovind Committee avoided this crucial question. The 23rd Law Commission says no ratification needed. Constitutional scholars disagree. The JPC must take a definitive position. Second, the midterm dissolution mechanism needs constitutional precision. What exactly happens when state governments fall? The proposed truncated term solution requires Supreme Court compatible language that doesn't create democratic deficits or constitutional crises. Third, Election Commission resource requirements must be quantified. Conducting simultaneous elections across 28 states and 8 union territories would require approximately double the current EVM and VVPAT inventory. The financial and logistical implications are staggering. Fourth, regional party safeguards remain undefined. How does the proposal prevent complete nationalization of state elections? Any credible recommendation must include structural protections for state-level political expression. Without this, federalism becomes merely administrative, not democratic. Before we close, let's quickly revise the key terms you should remember for the exam. One nation, one election. The proposal to synchronize Lok Sabha and State Assembly elections. Joint Parliamentary Committee. The 39-member body examining the Constitutional Amendment Bill. Kovind Committee, the high-level committee that submitted the 18,000-page report supporting ONOE, Basic Structure Doctrine, established in Kesavananda Bharati, limiting Parliament's amendment power. Article 174 gives governors power to dissolve state assemblies on Chief Minister's advice. Stepping back to see the bigger picture, one nation, one election represents a fundamental choice about Indian democracy's future direction. Efficiency versus accountability, administrative convenience versus federal autonomy. The governance gains are real, but so are the constitutional risks. The JPC's extended timeline reflects this complexity. Not political delay, but democratic deliberation. What emerges isn't a simple answer, but deeper question. Can India's complex federal democracy be made more efficient without sacrificing its pluralistic soul? The answer will shape not just election schedules, but the very nature of Indian democracy for generations.